two sisters lived at the old Thornefield Mansion at the edge of town. The place looked abandoned. The lawn looked like some kind of exotic jungle with tall grasses, vines, and poison ivy growing together in a lush, chaotic medley. The roof peeked over the overgrown trees like a brown scab. As kids, we used to dare each other to get near the mansion, but no one ever dared go inside. I heard strange stories about the identical twins, how they had some sort of shared telepathic abilities and could communicate with animals. They almost never talked, seemingly able to communicate entire thoughts to one another with just a glance or a nod. As a whole, the townspeople left them alone, and they left us alone. And when kids started going missing, no one gave the Thornefield twins a second thought. In reality, a lot of people assumed the twins were probably dead. They hadn't been seen in over a year by anyone in town. No one had the idea to go check the collapsing asbestos and mold-filled mansion, though. Or, maybe more likely, no one cared. People around town gossiped that the twins were the final product of generations of inbreeding. The Thornefield family tree apparently had very few branches and looked more like a straight, vertical line. First cousins regularly married, nieces were married off to their uncles, and half-brothers married their partial siblings. Occasionally an outsider married into the family, but as a whole, they successfully kept all their wealth contained in a small, tight-knit circle. They had gotten their money from the coal business. Over time, coal had declined, and so had their wealth. As they fell on increasingly hard times, the family members disappeared behind the once majestic walls of the mansion and cut themselves off from all contact with the outside world. The Thornefields had their own private graveyard on the border of the woods, and they did their own funeral preparations and digging. The private graveyard in the middle of the overgrown lawn didn't do much to make the mansion more welcoming. They got food and drinks dropped off on their doorstep and never left the property for any reason. Over time, many of the Thornefields died from suicides, overdoses, alcoholism, and murder. Some just disappeared mysteriously, never to be seen again. Eventually, only the two sisters remained insane, hungry and crazy as wild dogs. "What's that smell?" I asked my little brother, Howie. He wrinkled his tiny nose, scrunching up his face as if he tasted something bad. "It smelled like a rotting animal carcass to me." "I smell bad food," he squeaked. Howie was only 5, while I was 17. I had volunteered to take him trick or treating this Halloween. Howie pointed at a jack-o'-lantern outside an ancient cabin with peeling paint up ahead. "Halloween," he said, jumping up and down excitedly as if he were holding back a full bladder. "Look, Tony, Halloween pumpkin." Yes, I see it," I said, taking his hand and pulling him forward. Howie went and knocked on the door. An old man peered out, his glasses magnifying his eyes to owlish proportions. He looked down at Howie with his clown paint and costume on. "Trick or treat," Howie cried enthusiastically. The old man smiled, dropping a few candy bars into his little pumpkin bag. "You make a very professional clown, young man," the old man said in a quavering voice. "You remind me of Corky the Clown. He used to be on TV when I was young." Howie shook his head. "I don't know any Porky, thanks." Howie quickly turned and came back to my side. The old man watched us for a few moments as we took off down the street, the pale incandescent light streaming out of his house into the dark trees. The rancid smell seemed to be getting stronger. Dead leaves whipped around us as the autumn wind howled in triumph. As far as the eye could see, leafless trees reached up to the sky, their bare branches like emaciated arms raised in prayer to a dead god. The Thornefield Mansion was up ahead a few hundred feet on our right. The bare forest surrounded it, enclosing it like the walls of a prison. Even after years of neglect, the mansion still looked imposing and grandiose. Standing 5 stories tall, it had tall Victorian turrets that seemed to pierce the sky like a dagger. Massive bay windows looked out on the empty street. In the center, a wide oak door stood, painted jet black with nightmarish gargoyle heads nailed to the exterior. They grimaced and snarled, their stone faces frozen in expressions of eternal displeasure. It was a depressing sight, seeing the paint peeling from the once majestic walls, and many of the windows smashed to pieces. Jagged shards of glass caught the moon's pale glow, reflecting the points of light like the blade of a scalpel. "Scary," Howie said, pointing at the old, dilapidated mansion. "I don't like it." "Yeah, no one does, buddy," I said, trying to hurry him up past the eerie house. I wondered if anyone still lived there. As if in answer to my question, I saw the dark silhouette of a person in one of the shattered windows on the topmost floor. They stood in the tallest and sharpest of the Victorian turrets. When I glanced up, the silhouette quickly stepped out of view. Crawling out of the tall grass 20 feet ahead of us, I saw what I first thought to be an animal. Something naked and bloody dragged itself out on its belly, moaning in agony like a snake with a broken back. But I quickly realized it was too big to be an animal. 5 feet long with deep slash marks all over its skin, and large chunks of its flesh cut away. My eyes quickly latched onto the human features of the poor, mutilated creature. I saw 2 blue eyes staring back out at me from a mask of gore. They gleamed with extreme pain and mortal terror. "Oh my God," I cried, running forwards. I still clutched Howie's hand tightly, pulling him close behind me. "Jesus Christ, what happened?" The person moaned through a mouthful of blood. They coughed. Dark rivulets of thick blood dripped from their torn lips. "No, more, please." Their eyes closed, and they collapsed, their heads smacking against the road with a sound like a watermelon being dropped. I pulled out my phone, trying to dial the police. I saw I had no service all the way out here. I knew that, sometimes, 911 calls could go through even without service if an alternate carrier had a tower nearby. I pressed send, and raised it to my ear, waiting with bated breath as nothing happened. The phone continued to give a no service indicator. Howie stared down at the mutilated, bloody sight with unbelieving eyes. He moved closer to me, pressing his small body against my leg. I felt him trembling. "Tony," Howie cried. "I don't like..." The bleeding, half-dead body came to life suddenly, grabbing Howie's ankle. He screamed, an ear-splitting, high-pitched sound that shattered the silence of the dead forest. A wet spot spread over his pants. As his bladder let go, Howie reacted like a startled deer, running in a blind panic through the overgrown lawn of the mansion. The grass was nearly as tall as he was. He quickly disappeared from view in the shadows and waist-high weeds. "Howie," I hissed, "stop, come back, it's not safe." But he didn't appear to hear me. His wail faded as he sprinted in a blind panic away from the dying person. I looked down at the gasping, gurgling body lying broken on the cracked pavement. I didn't know what to do for a few seconds. I needed to get help for this person immediately, but I couldn't let Howie get lost in the woods or get hurt. Looking at the state of their body, I doubted if they would survive even if we had a Life-Star helicopter here. "Damn it, Howie," I whispered to myself, setting out across the lawn. Prickly bushes and vines grabbed at my ankles like greedy hands. I could vaguely see the outline of where Howie had gone due to the broken stalks of weeds and plants marking his passage, but I couldn't hear him anymore. "Howie," I called. My voice seemed far too loud, as if I had stood up and started screaming in the middle of the funeral. The mansion loomed overhead, its broken windows looking down like dilated, black pupils. Up ahead, I heard a door click softly shut. I looked up, my heart palpitating in my chest. I hoped Howie had not run into the mansion. I didn't see why he would, since he was terrified of it, but why had the door closed otherwise? I sprinted toward it. The steps leading up to the front porch had great gouges and deep holes eaten into them from the passage of time. The ancient wood groaned under my weight, and for a moment, I thought the boards might snap. "Howie," I whispered, pushing the door open. I thought of the dying person back on the sidewalk and swore I didn't have time to go on a wild goose chase. I should have been trying the neighbors to get the police there. After all, the mansion had no electricity, so there was no way I was calling for help from here. "Come here, now. This is an emergency, Howie." My voice echoed through the dark, shadowy antechamber. With trembling hands, I pulled out my cell phone and turned on the flashlight. Tendrils of black mold spread like rotten veins across the walls and ceiling. An ancient chandelier hung skewed from the ceiling, the rusted cables looking ready to snap at any moment. An overpowering smell of blood and rotting meat immediately assailed my senses. I gagged, retching. I covered my face with the crook of my elbow, trying to breathe through the sleeve to filter out some of the reeking, fetid odor. A once majestic grand staircase opened up in front of me, leading to a second floor whose balcony railings had long ago tumbled down. From upstairs, I heard a shriek of mortal terror pierce the night. I nearly jumped out of my skin, but it hadn't been the cry of a little boy. It sounded more like the cry of a man. I sprinted up the steps, repressing my urge to call for Howie. I shone my light into room after room, seeing furniture covered in dusty white sheets pushed off to the corners. Giant holes eaten into the ceiling allowed stagnant water to drip down. The place reeked like a swamp with undertones of something else lurking underneath something coppery. My stomach lurched as I recognized the smell of blood. I moved onto the once ornate bathroom, pushing open the door. Inside stood a nightmarish scene from hell. Hanging from above the shower, I saw a teenage boy, probably about high school age. He reminded me of statues of Jesus I had seen, crucified and broken. A cross hung down from the ceiling, suspended by a metal cable. It spun in circles, the chain winding and unwinding in clockwise and counterclockwise directions. As the boy's body writhed in agony, nails bit deeply into his ankles and wrists. He constantly groaned, his eyes rolling like those of a horse with a shattered leg. A spiral staircase on wheels had been rolled into the grand bathroom, reaching up 10 feet in the air to where the boy's torso hung suspended. I saw slice after slice cut into his body. They crisscrossed his body, some slashes going horizontally, vertically, or diagonally. Pieces of his skin hung off in stripes, barely attached to the flesh underneath. Blood dripped slowly from dozens of gruesome injuries. The tub below was an ancient, ornate thing with lion paw feet and a thick layer of rust covering its exterior. Blood soaked the entire inside of it, coagulating and dripping in drying rivulets. Looking down into its depths, I saw gallons and gallons of blood, far more than a single human body could possibly contain. It filled the tub nearly 3/4 of the way up, the crimson hues opaque and shimmering in the dim moonlight streaming in through the smashed window. The smell of copper and iron in the bathroom was overwhelming. "Please," the boy groaned as his eyes focused on me for a second before they started rolling back into his head. His skin looked pale and bloodless, his lips and fingernails taking on a bluish, cyanotic cast. "Get me down. It hurts so bad." I stood there, speechless, my phone's LED light illuminating the horrifying sight in its ghostly white light. Who did this?" I asked. His head rose, and his eyes focused on something behind me. "Her," he said through a mouthful of blood. Then his head drooped, his chin resting on his chest. I spun around. I caught a glimpse of a pale, ghostly face disappearing behind the door. I heard the echoes of soft laughter. I sprinted after the figure. "Hey, stop," I screamed. "Come back here." I booked it around the corner, but she was gone. There were dozens of rooms stretching down the hallway as well as a set of dilapidated servant stairs. I swore under my breath. I tried to quiet my breathing, listening hard for any sign of footsteps. From the floor above me, a board creaked. I thought I heard a muffled sob. It sounded like Howie. My heart felt like a block of ice. I went up the servants' stairs, taking them 2 at a time. They groaned precariously. As they turned 90 degrees, I put my entire body weight down on the top step before the landing. When I heard the crack, I knew I had made a grave mistake. The wood gave way with a splintering shriek, collapsing into pieces under my foot. My stomach rose into my throat. As I felt myself fall through the floor, I felt the air whipping past my head for a few moments as the ground rushed up to meet me. I remember landing hard on my side. My head smashed into the ground, sending pulsating dark spots dancing across my vision. Everything swam around me as the world slowly faded to black. I woke suddenly, streams of blood flowing down my forehead from a deep gash. I raised my fingers up to the warm blood. Pulling them back, I saw the crimson drops gleaming in the dim light streaming in from holes in the walls and ceiling surrounding me. I groaned, feeling an electric current of pain race through my skull as I tried to move. I looked around, finding myself in a basement of some sort. The smell of rotting meat down here was overpowering. I put my hands down, trying to push myself up off the ground. My fingers sank into something wet and squirming. A rank odor like roadkill and rotten tomatoes filled the air, so thick I could taste it. As I glanced down, a primal sense of disgust and horror filled my soul as I saw what I had landed on. Dozens of naked, decomposing bodies littered the cold, concrete basement floor. I saw many children among the dead, their sightless eyes staring blankly ahead in their pale, bloodless faces. On all the corpses, I saw signs of extreme torture and mutilation. Deep gashes ran through their skin, slashed into crisscrossing patterns. Squirming larvae writhed and skittered through the wounds, consuming the desecrated corpses. Flies walked over their open, staring eyes, occasionally pausing to feed on the decaying flesh beneath. Retching, I tried to push myself up, but my hands kept slipping on the slimy gore underneath. I felt the skin sloughing off the swollen body underneath me. Rancid, sticky fluid spurted out of the soft flesh like dirty dishwater being squeezed out of a sponge. After a few minutes of struggling, I managed to crawl across the room, slowly struggling over dozens of bodies. Many were filled with rancid gases, which burst out of their wet skin, with a sound like a balloon deflating. The air filled with the sickening smell of sulfur and bloody pus. By the time I got to the basement door, my clothes were totally covered in a rainbow of horrors. Pus leaked out from the decaying bodies in suppurating orange and gory scarlet. Dark, almost black blood stuck to my shirt and pants. I felt the squirming of maggots all over my hands and arms. Panicked, I furiously tried to get the writhing larvae off my skin. A small, filthy face peered around the corner of the rickety basement stairs. I saw a little girl with sunken eyes and gaunt cheekbones. Her arms and legs looked like sticks. Her swollen stomach bulged over her protruding hips. She wore blood-stained rags that barely covered her sickly body, her face pulled back from the corner. I ran forward, turning to see her sprinting away. With a few bounding steps, I caught up to her, grabbing her arm. It felt similar to a metal pole under my grip, no more than bone covered in a thin layer of skin. "I'm not going to hurt you," I whispered to her as she struggled like a panicked animal. Her eyes went wide as she tried to claw me in an effort to free herself. "Stop it," she gave an animalistic growl, opening her mouth and biting the fleshy part of my hand next to my thumb. I repressed an urge to shriek in pain. Instinctively, I smacked her across the face, feeling her little mouth let go. I put her in a bear hug, raising her off the ground like a toddler having a temper tantrum. She flayed her powerful tiny legs, hitting me in the groin and stomach. Exhaling a long breath, I hugged her tighter until she calmed down. "I'm trying to help you," I hissed through gritted teeth, feeling drops of blood running down my hand from the bite. "And in return, you make me need to get a rabies shot, you little bastard. Why are you in here? Have you seen a little boy here?" She shook her head quickly, her filthy, greasy hair falling over her eyes. "Don't you want to leave this place?" She shook her head quickly. "Can you talk?" She simply stared at me with blank, haunted eyes. "You look like you haven't had a good meal or a shower in a while, little girl," I said. She grinned at this, showing off her sharp milk teeth. Something psychopathic and cold seemed to move under the facade of this little girl, like a predator swimming under the waters of a fetid swamp. A smell began to rise in the mansion then, a choking, suffocating odor. Narrow fingers of black smoke started to reach into the hallway, twisting and curling from something downstairs. The little girl headbutted me hard in the nose. In surprise, I dropped her and she skittered off. I followed her down the hallway, a rising sense of anxiety gripping me. I was wasting too much time here. I should have found Howie and gotten a neighbor to call the police already. I cursed under my breath. A vision of Howie dead, crucified, and dripping blood above some ancient cursed shower rose in my mind. The little girl abruptly turned into a bedroom. Without hesitation, I followed. Beyond the threshold, I saw Howie with a knife to his throat. Behind him, a filthy woman with cracked, dried blood all over her pale skin grinned at me. She wore a gore-stained nightgown. Her dirty blonde hair ran nearly down to her waist, streaked with filth. Her dark eyes seemed too close together. Her bulbous nose and lips seemed asymmetrical, giving her face a slanted look. Behind her, I saw shadows flitting up and down the walls, black shapes with inhumanly long, twisted arms and legs. Dozens of them skittered like lizards, leaving a dark blur across the ceiling as they ran overhead. Howie cried silently in the woman's arms, keeping his eyes tightly shut. "Give me my brother back," I said, trying to portray a calmness I didn't feel in the slightest. Behind the woman's leg, I saw the little girl, clinging tightly to her thigh. "This little lamb," she said, a strange accent giving a lilt to her voice. "Now why would I do something like that?" "He has done nothing to you," I said, taking a step forward. The woman put the knife tightly against Howie's skin. I saw a drop of blood run down from where the point of the blade pressed against his neck. I stopped, putting my hands up. "I need his blood," she said, a fanatical gleam in her dark eyes. "It keeps the skin flawless and young. It keeps us whole and connected. Don't you see? I have lived here for over 100 years now. This is only the way, and I need to wait." She pointed to the skittering, black silhouettes behind her. "They take the meat, and we get the blood. After all, the meat has the strength, but the blood has the consciousness." A black smoke started to fill the room, acrid and thick. It came from the hallway behind us. "Ah, my sister has started the ritual. The burning smell of insect flesh, it's sweet in a way, isn't it?" I heard the slight creaking of ancient floorboards from the hallway outside. "But they are hungry, always hungry," she sighed. With her left hand, she gripped Howie's hair and yanked his small head back, exposing his throat like a sheep ready for slaughter. Howie made a noise like a strangled rabbit, a high-pitched squeak of mortal terror slipping out of his trembling lips. "Say goodbye, boy," the insane woman said as her eyes gleamed with bloodlust and determination. I ran forward, My face twisted into a silent scream, the wicked blade of the woman's knife glinting against Howie's pale skin. As she finished speaking, a gunshot rang out, as bone-rattling as a dynamite blast in the confined space. The insane woman's head exploded in a shower of brains and hair. I spun, seeing the old man from the cabin. He held an aged rifle in one hand. His gelid, ancient eyes slowly scanned the room. Howie still stood in the same spot, his eyes staring 1,000 miles away. His little body shook and trembled like a man having a seizure. "Come on," the old man hissed. "Do you two want to live? Let's get out of here." I ran to Howie, picking him up like a sack of potatoes. I felt the wet spot on his pants pressing against my hoodie. Howie's head lolled like a rag doll's. His face continued to emanate a slack, unfocused expression. He reminded me of catatonic schizophrenics I had heard about, people whose bodies would freeze into a single position for days or weeks. "How did you find us?" I asked, panting as I tried to keep up with the old man. He was faster and sprier than his old body suggested. "I heard the screams from my house," he said. "I saw you disappearing into the mansion. I brought my gun when I heard the screaming." "And did you see the body?" I asked, cutting him off. "Did you call the cops and ambulances yet?" He frowned, giving me a strange, sideways glance. "Body," he said, shaking his head. "No, I didn't see any bodies. Just you, disappearing into the mansion." But I knew that scream had come from a young child. The smoke grew thicker as we descended the servants' stairs to the massive entrance chamber. There, we found the other sister. A fire raged across the entrance chamber's floor. Long tongues of flame shot out, licking the cracked, dried wood of the mansion. A filthy woman dressed in tatters stood there, looking nearly identical to the other sister we had seen. Her eyes looked so dark that they appeared black. Bizarre scars covered most of her skin. She showed the scarred outlines of occult symbols and slash marks proudly like an artist showing off tattoos. Black, suffocating smoke rose in rounded plumes from the bonfire centered in front of the grand staircase. In the flames, I thought I saw something moving. I squinted, realizing that thousands of bugs squirmed and writhed in the flames. Insane and laughing, the woman took a metal bucket, pouring another load of skittering spiders, centipedes, stink bugs, and other insects onto the roaring fire. "Insect flesh draws the watchers," she said, seemingly speaking to herself. As if on cue, those black shadow creatures from upstairs slipped into the room. They climbed the hallways and ceilings, moving in chaotic, random patterns around the choking fire. They seemed to feed on it, to become more solid and black as the insect flesh burned and rose into the air. "We have kept ourselves young with the blood of the lambs," she spoke to the air and the smoke, raising her hands overhead. "But with the final ritual, the dead things inside can now crawl out. We will become immortal, we will become deathless and transcendent, like the Watchers." Behind the woman, I saw the young girl. The girl hugged the woman's leg, grinning up at me like a skull. The old man raised the gun, then he hesitated once he saw the girl. "I could get her with a headshot, I think," he murmured. I didn't know if he was talking to me or not, but his moment of hesitation proved fatal. "Kill them all," the woman hissed to the shadow creatures. "No witnesses." As soon as I heard those words gurgling from her mouth, I grabbed Howie and ran for the door. The old man fired, the gun barking again and again. I glanced back, seeing the woman lying dead on the ground, the girl standing above her screaming. Dark, twisted hands closed in on the old man. As I ran outside into the fresh autumn air, his agonized screams trailed after me. I knocked frantically on a neighbor's door. After a few minutes, we called for help. But as I stood in the street, watching the ancient structure turning to ash, I knew it was too late for anyone still inside. Dark shadows streamed into the nighttime sky, rising up with the pillar of smoke that blocked out the stars. And as I watched, I thought I saw a filthy, pale girl escape into the dead trees.